On the snowy day, there is something in me as a white man that urges me towards silence regarding speaking about a black man, and particularly one of such great eminence as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. For the older I get, the more keenly aware I become of the way being white, merely being white, automatically confers on me and all others who are like me privileges and advantages in relationship to those who are not white. That these advantages are invisible to those who enjoy them. And that movements towards genuine equality feels to the privileged like a threat. And that this privilege of which I speak distorts the lens through which all of life is viewed. So I am hesitant to speak about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, knowing these limitations, but there is part of me that is pulled in an opposite direction by the belief that more people like me need to attempt earnestly to understand Dr. King, what he meant, what he did with his life, what he stood for, and to glimpse, if only imperfectly and partially, why we will all be better if we deeply integrate what he stood for. The social, political, religious movement that Dr. King helped lead was composed by many people. Some of them are nameless, some of them known to history, some of them having done extraordinary work in supporting Dr. King and his work. There is additionally hundreds and hundreds of people who prepared the way for what Dr. King did. So Dr. King did not create a movement by himself, but he was most certainly the epicenter, the symbol, and the public face of a complex and powerful social movement. Dr. King had no army or police force, no public relations firm, no spy agency, no formal political standing, no secure source of funding. Furthermore, he had extremely powerful enemies. He faced a wide assortment of organized and unorganized groups of people who wanted to destroy him or render him inactive. His most powerful enemy, J. Edgar Hoover, wiretapped King from 1963 onward and sought in numerous ways to undermine him. Certain groups within the Black community itself, such as those led by Stokely Carmichael, thought the idea of nonviolent protest passé and irrelevant. A few people within his closest circles informed on him to the CIA, FBI. Yet amid this sea of difficulties, he and those he worked with created immense change, almost inconceivable change, and certainly increased awareness powerfully. The movement he led was at times more important and relevant than the federal government itself. Dr. King sought to bring our country into alignment with its core values because Dr. King, despite all the reasons not to do so, discerned some value and worth at the core of the way our government organized itself, and he sought to bring that as a mirror to the face of the public. Not since the beginning of our republic or the Reconstruction legislation of 1865 through 68 or the work of FDR has anyone attempted change on such a massive scale. Dr. King's mission evolved over time in ways that are significant. He began with a critique of racial injustice in the Deep South. With the passage of time, however, Dr. King began to speak against the Vietnam War, economic inequality, the ideological and organizational underpinnings of systematic injustice. He saw with a gathering clarity up until the very end of his life the connections between racism, white power ideologies, poverty, imperialism, the military-industrial complex, structural disparities of wealth and power, and all manner of social injustices. He saw how all these conditions were connected and part of a system that needed to be deconstructed and reconstructed along justice lines. Dr. King stood for a vision of society where, quite simply, the safety, security, and well-being of all citizens, with no one left out, should guide society and how it is organized. Dr. King's goals became, over time, immensely ambitious and far-reaching. A core teaching of Dr. King's work was nonviolent resistance. He wrote, "Occasionally in life, one develops a conviction so precious and meaningful that he will stand on it to the end. That is what I have found in nonviolent power." I had come to see, he wrote, early on that the Christian doctrine of love operating through the Gandhian method of nonviolence was one of the most potent weapons available to us in our struggle for freedom. Nonviolence, he wrote, is not a method of stagnant passivity. It is a courageous confrontation of evil by the power of love. This position allowed King to stay present with innumerable injustices and to remain non-reactive in his opposition while staying utterly proactive and in alignment with his mission. That is the essence of leadership, and King embodied it. One of the most disturbing experiences King had was in dealing with people who knew in their hearts and minds that change was necessary and knew what that change should be, but would not engage in effort to make those changes happen. In his letter to the Birmingham jail, 1963, he wrote, "I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that our great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection." America, he wrote, has failed to hear and understand that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice, humanity, and equality. As long as justice is postponed, we will be on the verge of social destruction. King's religious faith was central to his work, and Unitarian Universalists often gloss over this, but it was a real and powerful force in his life. And given the fact that the vast majority of humanity at any point in time seemed arrayed against him and menacing toward him, I think UUs often fail to realize the depth of the importance of his religious faith as a way to stand strong against these forces. King wrote, "Let us keep moving with the faith that what we are doing is right, and with the even greater faith that God is with us in the struggle." Dr. King believed that there was a collaboration at work between human volition and activity and some kind of moral order of the universe, which was waiting for the realization and the actions of people to enact the justice that they knew was true. Somewhere, he wrote, "We must come to see that all human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless effort and the persistent work of dedicated individuals who are willing to be co-workers with the divine. Without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation." Dr. King was provoked to advocate for violence again and again, but he stayed true to his emphasis on love as the solution to the human condition. "There is something about love," he wrote, "that builds up and is creative. There is something about hate that tears down and is destructive." Dr. King was provoked again and again and again to run away, to flee the madness, but he stayed present to the challenges and in fact walked toward them. Dr. King was offered the position as minister of the Riverside Church in New York, one of the most prestigious pulpits in America. He turned down that offer. Dr. King was offered several opportunities to teach at major universities and seminaries in America. He turned down all those offers. Taking any of those offers could have given him a dignified off-ramp from the turmoil and the danger of the road he traveled, but he stayed on. He sensed that someone would kill him and spoke about it often to friends, but he stayed in the melee. He did not retreat to a safe place. He stayed in the humble places his work took him. And this speaks volumes of Dr. King, his character and commitment. Dr. King was pressured again and again to compromise his principles, and he did not do so. Dr. King's statement about Vietnam in 1967 at the Riverside Church was part of the trajectory of his vision and moral mission. But it also lost him a great deal of support. He was forced into greater isolation and depression. He lost significant funding. He incurred the wrath of President Johnson. He incurred the wrath of the popular press. But he stayed true to the evolution of his morality and his life course. Our society, I think, is very, very far away from appreciating the importance of what Dr. King did and the continuing and present relevance of his examples. There are exceptions. I greatly admire the way Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II and the National Poor People's Campaign are carrying forward the work of Dr. King and his vision. Dr. King will be lionized over the next few days. Often these words will ring false, a part of someone's publicity campaign. Martin Luther King would not want us to idolize him, to lionize him, and most certainly not to put him on a pedestal. More than a few times, he pointed to his own foibles as a human. But he would want us to, in some way, follow his example. The world is so full of so many injustices and sorrows, it is impossible to calculate. How to honor Dr. King's memory comes in countless forms. However, at this moment, one thing which stands out to me is the importance of the passage of the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act. This bill unambiguously and vividly represents the core values Dr. King worked for, lived for, and died for. So I am asking you this week to consider taking an action, a simple action, in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., one that I think he would appreciate. And that is by expressing your support for this bill in a specific way. Towards the end of the service, I will tell you more specifically how you can do this. And now to Mitch.